We're in Perek Gimel, Mishnah Aleph. We learned that in the second Beis Hamikdash, as in Yet Hashem will happen in the third Beis Hamikdash, which we're building as we learn, Be'ezrat Hashem, the Mizbe'ach at its foundational level started at 32 by 32. And then by the time we got to the top of the Mizbe'ach, where Karbonos were brought, it was 24 by 24. If we look at diagram 19, you can see that the Mizbe'ach is made up of several parts. Picture 4 on diagram 19. The foundation, which was 32 by 32, and it went up to a height of 1. That's called Yesod. Please remember that word Yesod, because we're going to be talking about Yesod today. That's the Yesod. Then the Mizbe'ach now has been indented 1. It went up 1 at the Yesod, and then they put another box on top of that, and that box was only 30 by 30. So 32 by 32 as the base. The next level is 30 by 30. So it indented at the height of 1. It went up 5, 30 by 30, indented to 28 by 28. And then at the top of the Mizbe'ach, there were the 4 corners, which were an amma by an amma. Each corner took up an amma, so you lose another 2 ammas, 26 by 26. And then they had a place where Kohanim can walk so they don't get burnt by the fire, which was an amma on every single side. So you lost another 2 ammas. So the Mizbe'ach, which started at the bottom, 32 by 32, at the top, where the fires were, the 3 fires that we discussed yesterday on top of the Mizbe'ach, the area was 24 by 24. So you lost 8 ammas by 8 ammas from the foundation. And that's how the Mizbe'ach was built. We looked at diagram 20, which showed this to us clearly. The foundation, 32 by 32, went up 1, an indent because the next box was 30. It went up 5, indent. The next box was 28. And by the time you got to the top of the Mizbe'ach, you had 26 by 26, and then a place for the Kohanim to walk was 24 by 24. That was the Mizbe'ach in the second Beis Hamikdash, and the Mizbe'ach for the third Beis Hamikdash b'mheira v'yameinu. Rabbi Yossi, on page 44 of our Masechta Middos, then introduced us yesterday to what the Mizbe'ach looked like in the first Beis Hamikdash. In the first Beis Hamikdash, the foundation was 30 by 30 instead of 30. It was 12. I'm sorry. In the first Beis Hamikdash was 28 by 28. So the base of the Mizbe'ach in the first Beis Hamikdash was 4 amos by 4 amos smaller than the one in the second Beis Hamikdash. And then it did the same indents. So in the second Beis Hamikdash, it goes from 32 to 24, a loss of 8, so to speak. In the first Beis Hamikdash, it starts at 28, and it also loses the same 8. So the top of the Mizbe'ach in the first Beis Hamikdash, where there were fires, was 20. The top of the Mizbe'ach in the second Beis Hamikdash and in the third Beis Hamikdash from Yameinu, the top is going to be 24. That difference of 4. First Beis Hamikdash, the top is 20. Second Beis Hamikdash and third Beis Hamikdash, the top is 24, is because in the second Beis Hamikdash, they added 4 ammas to the size of the Mizbe'ach. We looked yesterday at the diagram. Diagram 20A. They added 4 amos to the Mizbe'ach, and this is going to be what we're going to talk about today, B'li Neder. There are a lot of ways to do this, to add 4 amos on each side. So they could have added 2 amos on the south, 2 amos on the north, 2 amos on the west, 2 amos on the east. They could have added 2 amos on each side, and the Mizbe'ach would have increased 4 by 4. They did not do that in the second Beis Hamikdash. What they did is they added an additional 2 amos. As you can see, the diagram is showing you. They added an additional 2 amos on the northern side, and that's what Rabbi Yossi tells us. Page 44, Uksha'olu min hagola, hosifol of arba amos min hadorom. They added 4 amos on the southern side of the Mizbeach, va'arba amos min hamayra, and 4 on the Mayra. So they didn't do 2 on each side. They picked 2 sides, the west and the south. And they added 4 amos on each of those sides. So the Mizbeach went from 28 by 28 at the bottom to 32 by 32. Now, why did they just add 2 on each side? And we discussed that yesterday. They added 2 on each side because the Mizbeach that Shlomo built for the first Beis HaMikdash was built, and as we learned the Rambam, the Mizbeach Hamokom Mechuvin Biyoser, it has to be in an exact place on the Har HaBayis. It's the place where God took the dust of the earth, the Rambam tells us. God took the dust of the earth and formed Adam Harishon. It is the place where Adam built the Mizbeach. Cain and Hevel built the Mizbeach. Noach built the Mizbeach. Avram went and brought Yitzhak to the Akedah on that Mizbeach. That is a very precise location. And when they built the second Beis HaMikdash, Hagi, Zechariah, and Malachi, 3 of the last prophets in the history of the Jewish people, they went to Eretz Yisrael, and they had to teach the people who were building the Beis HaMikdash precisely where this Mizbeach had to go. So the Mizbeach had to be in a very precise place. Now, when Shlomo built the Mizbeach, we know that on the top of the Mizbeach, when certain karbanos were brought, they would pour wine on the top of the Mizbeach. Sukkos, they would pour water. This water and this wine was supposed to go into the Shitin. The Shitin it's a pipe that was dug by David, according to one Shita in the Gemara. It was dug by David, and David went down to the center of the earth where there's water. We just spoke about the water. There's water at the center of the earth, and this water that was poured on the Mizbeach Sukkos and the wine that was poured for certain karbanos the whole year would go into the Shitin and go down to the center of the earth. How did this water and wine get into the Shitin? So the Mizbeach, the top of the Mizbeach, where they poured the water and the wine and the wine, the top of the Mizbeach was on a slight incline. And so the water and the wine would roll off the top of the Mizbeach, come down, flow down the wall of the Mizbeach. And next to the Mizbeach, there was a bore, there was a ditch. And this ditch connected into the Shitin. So the wine and the water would flow down off the top of the Mizbeach, down the wall of the Mizbeach, into the bore and into the Shitin. And that's how things worked in the first Beis HaMikdash. Now, Shlomo HaMelech couldn't take the Mizbeach at 28 by 28 and move it a little over so that the Mizbeach would be right on top of the bar. It wouldn't help because the water and the wine wouldn't go into the bar. There was no hole on the Mizbeach at the top of the Mizbeach in Shlomo's Mizbeach. There's no hole at the top of the Mizbeach. There will be one in the second Beis HaMikdash, which we will discuss in a moment. The Mizbeach, Shlomo Mizbeach, was solid. There were no holes or pipes on top. So the only way for the wine and the oil, the wine and the water to get into the Shitin was to put the Mizbeach exactly where it belongs and let the wine and the water flow off the side of the wall, onto the floor, into the bar, and into the sheet. Second Beis HaMikdash came, and it was decided that they're going to do something a little different. They can't move the Mizbeach. It has to be in exactly the place that Shlomo built the Mizbeach. But they didn't want, and we'll see why in a moment, they didn't want the wine and the water flowing off the top of the Mizbeach onto the floor into the ditch. They wanted the wine and the water to flow from the top of the Mizbeach straight into the ditch without going outside the Mizbeach, down the wall and on the floor. They wanted the wine and the oil to stay on the top of the Mizbeach and from there go into a pipe in the Mizbeach and the pipe should connect into the ditch. Well, how are you going to do that? Well, first thing you're going to do is you're going to create a pipe work in the Mizbe'ach, which we'll take a look in the diagram in a minute. But that is only one half of the problem. You now have a pipe at the top of the Mizbe'ach, so when you pour water and oil on the top of the Mizbe'ach, water and wine on the top of the Mizbe'ach, the water and the wine will go into this pipe. And the water and the wine will go down this pipe, but then it's going to hit the floor at the base of the Mizbe'ach. It's not going anywhere. It's not going to go into the ditch. So they made the Mizbe'ach a bit larger. They made it 32 by 32. So now the Mizbe'ach was wide enough to cover the ditch. And they made the pipe at the top of the Mizbe'ach go through the Mizbe'ach, out the bottom of the Mizbe'ach, and right into the ditch. So they had to do two things. If they wanted the water and the wine to flow right from the Mizbe'ach into the Shitin and not over the wall of the Mizbe'ach, they had to do two things. They couldn't move the Mizbe'ach. A, they need to make the Mizbe'ach bigger so that the Mizbe'ach now covers the ditch. But now they had to make a pipe system in the Mizbe'ach so that what was on the water and the wine on top of the Mizbe'ach would go into a pipe and go straight into the ditch. They had to do two things. And they did these two things. The Gemara in Zevachim and Dasamach Aleph Amid Beis discusses why this change, well, not why, but how can you make this change? We discussed that you can't make any changes to the dimensions of the Beis HaMikdash. The Ramban, as we mentioned yesterday, talks about this in Parshas Truma. The Rebbeinu Shalom said to Moshe, here are the dimensions of the Aron, here are the dimensions of the Shulchan, here are the dimensions of the Mizbe'ach. And then the pasuk says, not exact chronological order, but then the pasuk says, "V'chein ta'asu," "V'chein ta'asu," and so shall you do. Rashi comments in the name of the Medrash, name of Chazal, "V'chein ta'asu lidoros." These are the dimensions for all generations that build. They have to follow these dimensions. So we mentioned yesterday, you already have problem one because Moshe's Mizbe'ach was much smaller than Shlomo HaMelech's Mizbe'ach. So how did they change that? We're not going to deal with that. Shlomo had a Masorah from David, who had a Masorah from Gad Hanavi and Nasan, Gad HaChoza and Nasan Hanavi. And everything was written down by the word of God. These are the dimensions. Okay, so God said in Parshas Truma, "V'chein ta'asu l'doros," and yet God also gave new dimensions for certain things in the first Beis HaMikdash. That's a sugya the Ramban talks about in Parshas Truma as well as other commentaries. We're focusing now only on Shlomo and the second, third Beis HaMikdash. Again, the second and third Beis HaMikdash both will have the same Mizbe'ach 32 by 32 at its foundation. So Gemara in Samach Aleph Amud Beis tells us that there's a pasuk in the Torah that supports each of these constructions. Shlomo HaMelech read the pasuk, and again, we're dealing here with everything is a pasuk or everything is a Kabbalah from Nasan Hanavi and Gad HaChoza, and how those interact again is beyond our shir. But Shlomo HaMelech saw a pasuk at the end of Parshas Yisro. At the end of Parshas Yisro, when the Rebbeinu Shalom's talking to Moshe about a Mizbe'ach, he says, "Mizbe'ach Adoma Tasali," an earth Mizbe'ach you should make for me. What is an earth Mizbe'ach? So Rashi tells us, the Chazal tell us, that this Mizbe'ach, upon which Karbonis were brought, remember there are two Mizbechot, both in the Mishkan and the Beis HaMikdash. One is the large Mizbe'ach, going to our diagram 3. It's the large Mizbe'ach that we're talking about now. As soon as you entered Shar Nicanor, you went through Shar Yisrael, Shar Kohanim, Ezra's Kohanim, Ezra's Yisrael, Ezra's Kohanim. You came to a large Mizbe'ach. That's what we're talking about now. It has 3 fires on top of it. That's what animals were brought for Karbonis. Inside the inner chamber of the Heichal is a small Mizbe'ach. and that's called the Mizbe'ach HaKetores, where incense was burned. This is the Mizbe'ach HaChitzon, the outer Mizbe'ach, because it's outside the Heichal, and the small Mizbe'ach of Ketores is called the Mizbe'ach HaPnim, the inner Mizbe'ach, or the Mizbe'ach HaKetores. We are not talking about the Mizbe'ach HaKetores. We're only talking about the large Mizbe'ach upon which animal sacrifices were brought. So on this Mizbe'ach, it says Moshe also built 2 Mizbachot. He built a Mizbe'ach upon which karbonos could be brought in the Mishkan, and he built a Mizbe'ach upon which incense can be brought that was in an inner chamber in the Mishkan. The Mizbe'ach upon which karbonos were brought in the Mishkan that Moshe made, that Mizbe'ach we call the Mizbe'ach HaNechoshes. It was made out of cedar wood, and it was covered with copper. The small Mizbe'ach upon which Ketoris was made of gold. Its another name is Mizbe'ach HaZahav, the gold Mizbe'ach. The gold Mizbe'ach is the Ketoris Mizbe'ach, the incense Mizbe'ach, the small Mizbe'ach, which we're not dealing with right now. The one we're dealing with right now in Moshe Rabbeinu's time was not like the one we're learning about now that's made out of stone. It was made out of wood, eitz erez, and then covered with copper. So it was called the Mizbe'ach HaNechoshes. This Mizbe'ach HaNechoshes had 4 walls to make the Mizbe'ach, but it didn't have a bottom, and it didn't have a top. And they were able to carry this in the Midbar as they traveled with the Mishkan. And wherever the Ribono Shel Olam gave them the signal to stop, they would stop, put up the Mishkan. They put this Mizbe'ach in the outer courtyard in the courtyard of the Mishkan, and then they would fill it with sand. And so this Mizbe'ach is called Mizbach Adama. Moshe's Mizbe'ach in the Mishkan, the one that they brought sacrifices on, is called Mizbach Adama. It was a Mizbe'ach that was filled with Adama. And then they made the Ma'arachot on top of the Mizbe'ach, the fires. They put wood on top and made the fires. And when they had to move, because God gave the command, you're going to move in the desert, you're going to travel, they lifted the Mizbe'ach, and they were able to carry it because it wasn't filled with dirt. The dirt just fell out. That's only Moshe Rabbeinu's Mishkan Mizbe'ach. Shlomo HaMelech interpreted that to mean that Moshe Rabbeinu's Mizbe'ach had 4 walls filled with sand and therefore was solid. There was no pipes. The 4 walls of the Mizbe'ach were completely filled. There was no openings or holes in this Mizbe'ach. They took the 4 copper walls, which were a box, and they filled it with sand. And it had to be filled with sand. So Shlomo HaMelech deduced from there that when he builds the Mizbe'ach in the first Beis HaMikdash, which was going to be from stone, right, we haven't gotten to that point yet, but all the frames that were built, we mentioned that they were then filled with stone. The frame was filled with special stone. Hot lead was poured on it. Tar was poured on it. It became hardened. The frame was removed. So they took a frame of 32 by 32, filled it with stone, and then hardened it with tar and hot lead, and then pulled the boards away, and they had a foundation that was rock foundation. And then they did the same thing the next level, boards that were 5 amos high, but now 30 by 30. They filled it with stones, the tar and the hot lead. It hardened, they pulled away the frame, and now they had 30 on top of 32. And that's how the Mizbe'ach was built, but it became stone Mizbe'ach. It wasn't made of wood. Shlomo, however, deduced that since Moshe's Mizbe'ach was solid, it had 4 walls, and then it was filled with sand and nothing in the sand. He therefore deduced that when he builds the Mizbe'ach in the first Beis Hamikdash, he's going to build it as the dimensions require, 28, 26, etc. And it's going to be solid. The same way Moshe Rabbeinu had no pipes in his Mizbe'ach, it was a solid. It was the four walls filled with sand. Shlomo Melech said, this Mizbe'ach is going to be different dimensions, but it's going to be completely filled with stone, no pipes in it. And that's how he built the Mizbe'ach. And since the Mizbe'ach had to be in a particular place, he built it there on that place and made it 28 by 28, and he couldn't put a pipe in there. So how was he going to get the water and the wine into the sheetin? They dug this ditch, and the ditch connected to the sheetin, and the water and the wine flowed off the top of the Mizbe'ach, down the wall of the Mizbe'ach, into the sheetin. That's why he did it that way. He had no choice as far as he was concerned, because he couldn't build a pipe into the top of the Mizbe'ach. The Bnei Hagola, when they came back from Bavel and they built the second Beis Hamikdash, they built the Mizbe'ach for the second Beis Hamikdash, they had a different authority. They, the Gemara tells us, understood that shasiya ka'achila, drinking is like eating. Wherever they got that concept from, that's a discussion in Gemara in Zvachim. Drinking is like eating. And since consuming the animal occurs at the top of the Mizbe'ach, that's called achila, eating. The Mizbe'ach is eating the solid animal. It's consuming the solid animal. Where does the consumption of the solid animal take place? At the top of the Mizbe'ach. Therefore, shasiya, the drinking, the Mizbe'ach is going to, so to speak, drink the wine and the water. The wine and the water has to also occur at the top of the Mizbe'ach. The same way the animal is consumed and eaten in the fire on top of the Mizbe'ach. The liquids have to go through the top of the Mizbe'ach. Shasiya, drinking kachila, should be the same way as the eating. The animals consumed on the top of the Mizbe'ach, the wine and the water should also be consumed at the top of the Mizbe'ach. How do you do that? That means that you don't want the wine and the water going off the side of the Mizbe'ach. You want it being consumed at the top of the Mizbe'ach. Okay, we're going to build a pipe at the top of the Mizbe'ach, and we'll run the pipe down into the sheetin. But we can't do that, because if the Mizbe'ach is 28 by 28, the pipe will not reach the ditch. So we're going to expand the Mizbe'ach to 32 by 32. This pipe will now go into the ditch, and now we have shasiya kachila. The karbonos are being consumed in the fire on top of the Mizbe'ach, and the water and the wine are also being consumed at the top of the Mizbe'ach, going right from the top of the Mizbe'ach into the sheetin. And then the Gemara asks, well, what did the people in the second Beis Hamikdash do with their understanding of Mizbe'ach Adama? The Torah does say that Moshe was commanded to build a Mizbe'ach Adama, a solid Mizbe'ach. It sounds like you can't have a pipe in the Mizbe'ach. So what did the people in the second Beis Hamikdash do with that? It was a very nice thought that the meat should be consumed at the top, and the water and the wine should be consumed at the top through this pipe. But you can't have a pipe. Moshe's Mizbe'ach was solid with dirt in it. So the people in the second Beis Hamikdash had a different interpretation to the pasuk. Mizbe'ach Adama, Moshe Rabbeinu, yes, he filled it with sand. But it doesn't mean that you can't have a pipe. Mizbe'ach Adama simply means that the Mizbe'ach has to be attached to the Adama. It has to be flat on the ground. You can't build the Mizbe'ach on stilts. It can't be elevated from the ground. It's Mizbe'ach Adama. So the people in the second Beis Hamikdash understood Mizbe'ach Adama differently. Shlomo understood Mizbe'ach Adama means it's filled with no pipe inside. No pipe inside. What do I do about the wine and the water? It's going to have to flow off the side. People in the second Beis Hamikdash said, no, the meat is consumed at the top, therefore the wine and the water is consumed at the top, so we're going to make a pipe, and we're going to expand them as back to 32 by 32 so that the wine and the water can go right into the pipe, and we're going to extend it 32 by 32. But what do you do with Mizbe'ach Adama? It has to be solid. It can't have a pipe in it. No. That's not necessarily what the pasuk means. It is true that it was solid in Moshe's time, but it doesn't have to be solid. What Moshe Rabbeinu, what Hashem was telling Moshe Rabbeinu, Mizbe'ach Adama, I want the Mizbe'ach connected to the ground. I don't want it built on stilts. So that's the history of why they changed the Mizbe'ach and the second Beis Hamikdash versus the first Beis Hamikdash. Now let's continue with the Mishnah. We're on page 45. We're going back to now whether it's Shlomo's Mizbe'ach or the second Beis Hamikdash Mizbe'ach. Either way, we're talking now about, we're not talking about Moshe's Mizbe'ach, Shlomo's Mizbe'ach, the second Beis Hamikdash Mizbe'ach that we're building now for the third Beis Hamikdash, Meher Yameinu, whichever one. Let's focus right now for the second Mizbe'ach, the Mizbe'ach of the Bayis Sheni and the Bayis Shlishi. The Mishnah says, Chut shel Sikra. They drew a line of red around the Mizbe'ach. Now, after they built the Mizbe'ach, remember they made a frame of 30, filled it with stone to the height of 1. They hardened the stone. The stone was hardened. They then put a frame of 30 by 30 to the height of 5, filled it with stone, hardened it, took off the frame. Then they built the next level, 28 by 28 to a height of 3, filled it with stone, hardened it, removed the frame. And so the Mizbe'ach was built, and then there was one more amma of those 4 corners, which was also made of stone. When all the frames are removed, the 32 by 32 and the 30 by 30 and the 28 by 28 and the 1 by 1, all the frames are removed, you have a Mizbe'ach that is now stone. You see stone. You don't see a wood frame. The wood frame has been removed. You see hardened stone. That hardened stone was then painted with sort of a white line. Mizbe'ach was actually white. It was a white line. The Mishnah will talk about later in the Masechta about how they kept it clean. The Mizbe'ach was stone painted with like a white line. Then they took red ink, and they drew a line around the center of the Mizbe'ach. That line is called Chut HaSikra, the red line. So the Mishnah tells us, for Chut Shel Sikra Chogro Be'emtza. The red line goes around the Mizbe'ach at the center of the Mizbe'ach. Why do I need this line at the center? Lahavdil bein hadamim ho'elyonim lidamim tachtonim. Because there are certain karbanos where the blood has to be sprinkled on the top half of the Mizbe'ach. We learned that out of Psukim. And there are certain karbanos where the blood has to be sprinkled on the lower half of the Mizbe'ach. The Mizbe'ach is 10. The midpoint is 5. So at the midpoint, they drew this red line. And so a Kohen who had to sprinkle blood on the Mizbe'ach, he knew certain karbanos are above this red line, certain karbanos are below this red line. If you take a look at diagram 21, okay. Diagram 21 shows you the dimensions of the Mizbe'ach, and it's now showing you the Chut HaSikra. The Mizbe'ach from the ground to the top of the corners is 10. The Yesod, the foundation, is 1. The next part of the Mizbe'ach is called Sovev. The Sovev actually went up 5. Remember we said the bottom is to a height of 1. The second piece is to a height of 5. The second piece is to a height of 3. So the second piece is called Sovev. The Sovev goes to a height of 5. But at the end of 4 amos of the Sovev, you had the midpoint of the Mizbe'ach, because you have a height of 1 of the foundation, 1 amma height of foundation, Yesod, 4 amos height of Sovev, you're now at 5. And that's where they drew the Chut HaSikra. The Sovev then continued itself for 1 more amma because the Sovev is 5. At the 5th amma of the Sovev, they put a decoration. It was kind of flowers work. It was a decoration for the Mizbe'ach. So you have 1 amma height foundation, 5 amos height of Sovev. At the end of 4 amos of Sovev, you now have the Chut HaSikra, because the Mizbe'ach now is 5 amos high, 1 Yesod, 4 Sovev. And then the fifth am of the Sovev are these decorations. The Mizbe'ach then was indented again, and you had the new structure, which was at that point 28 by 28, the height of 3 amos. And that's the Chut HaSikra, and it's separated between the waters, the blood that had to be sprinkled below, the blood that had to be sprinkled above. I'm going to read the next part of the Mishnah a bit quickly. I'm going to give you an introduction. It's not complex, but it requires a lot of background knowledge. Just going to read it quickly and take a look at a diagram, and we'll deal with it more in depth, Bli Neder, tomorrow. V'hayesod, the foundation of the Mizbe'ach, that place that was 32 by 32. Remember, I said there's a trick to this. We're going to learn about, quote unquote, this trick. In order to proceed through the Mishnah, when we started this perek, we said the bottom of the Mizbe'ach is 32 by 32, which means it's 32 on the north, 32 on the south, 32 on the east, 32 on the west. We're now going to learn that that's not that simple. The Mishnah says on page 45, Hayesod, Haya Mahalech, we're in Perek Gimel, Mishnah Aleph, towards the end of the Mishnah, and it's page 45 in our version of Middos. V'hayesod, the foundation, Haya Mahalech al Pnei Kol Hatzafon, it went across the whole northern side of the Mizbe'ach. Be patient, I'll show you a diagram. V'al Pnei Kol Hamayra, and the Yesod of 32 went across the whole western side of the Mizbe'ach. The southern side of the Mizbe'ach and the eastern side of the Mizbe'ach, with a little exception that we'll talk about in a moment, did not have that foundation. If we go back, just as a simple diagram, we go back to diagram 3 of the whole Beis HaMikdash. We're looking at this Mizbe'ach. If you look carefully at the Mizbe'ach, the bottom of the picture is Tzafon, the top of the picture is Doron, this is Mizrach entering the Ezras Nashim, and this is Ma'ariv, the Kodesh Kadoshim. The bottom of the picture is Tzafon. Now let's look at the Tzafon wall of the Mizbe'ach. The Tzafon wall of the Mizbe'ach, if you look at the picture, it's showing you a foundation. If you look carefully at your picture, the word Yesod is written in there. On the northern side of the Mizbe'ach, this 32 by 32 foundation was there. That's the northern side. The western side of the Mizbe'ach. Here you have the western side, the one that's getting closer to this structure. There's a Yesod, 32. Those are the only two sides, the western side and the northern side, that had this 32 base, Yesod. The southern side and the eastern side did not have a base of 32. It was smaller at its base. Why? That's question 1. 2, how did they build it? If we said that they made a frame and they put stone in the frame and then poured tar and hot lead to harden it, how do you have two sides 32 and two sides less than 32? So let's go back to our original diagram about building a Mizbe'ach. It's diagram 19. In picture 1A, you have to look at this very carefully in your picture. Picture 1A, they made a frame that was 32 by 32. They took 4 boards that were a little more than 32 by 32 and put them together so that the inner part of the frame was 32 by 32 to start. If you look carefully at your picture, they're showing, by arrow, they're showing you that inside the frame, they put another frame. And they put this frame, okay, you can see it inside. They put this frame inside the Mizbe'ach on the southern side of the Mizbe'ach, and they also put it on the eastern side of the Mizbe'ach. The width of this inner frame was 1 amma. The length was 31. So what happens now? You pour stone into this frame that's 32 by 32. But on the southern wall of the frame and the eastern wall of the frame, there's a board inside that's an amma thick, which means that the stone can't flow in that direction. The stone is not going to reach the southern or eastern frame because there's a board there that's an amma thick that won't let the stone go. It's blocking the stone. And it's blocking the stone by the thickness of an amma. So the stone's not going to get to that wall. But the this inner wall, this amma block, so to speak, is only 31 in length. So the stone that they pour in, the tar that they pour in, the hot lead that they pour in will spread out on the northern frame to the length of 32. It'll spread out on the western frame to the length of 32. But as the stone is spreading out towards the southern and eastern walls of the frame, it can't spread to 32 because this is blocking it. So if you're blocking it, the stone can't get there. The result is 1B. By the time the tar and the lead harden, you have 1B. You have on the northern wall and the western wall, you have a yesod, a frame that's 32 by 32. But on the southern and eastern walls, because it was blocked during the pouring, you don't have this yesod. But you do see that the yesod curves in on these sides. And that's because if you look at 1A, in each, the yesod, the inner block was only 31. The outer frame was 32, the inner block was 31. So when they poured the stone was able to spread only as far as the frame or the block allowed it. On the western side and on the northern side, there was no block. And so it spread to 32. On the eastern and southern side, there was this block inside the frame, and that block was 1 amma wide and 31 ammas long, the result being this picture. You now have the foundation of the Mizbe'ach on the north and on the west, a full 32. On the east and the south, you don't have this frame, but you have a little bend that came into the south and came into the east. And that's what the yesod of the Mizbe'ach looked like. Therefore, the Mishnah now tells us, V'ha-yesod, okay, we're looking at the picture and the Mishnah. V'ha-yesod, that first foundation of the Mizbe'ach that went up to a height of 1, Haya mahalech al pnei kol hatzafon, it extended to the entire northern wall of the Mizbe'ach, v'al pnei kol hamaruv, and on the whole western wall of the Mizbe'ach. The yesod was 32 in length on the western wall of the Mizbe'ach and 32 in length on the northern wall of the Mizbe'ach. V'ochel, and the yesod ate up badorom amma achas, on the southern side of the Mizbe'ach. It ate 1 amma on the southern side, uva Mizbe'ach amma achas, and on the eastern wall it also ate 1 amma. What does eating 1 amma mean? So there are 2 ways to look at it. We're going to look at it the way Rashi looks at it. The Rambam looks at it a bit differently. If we go back to our picture of the picture diagram 21 of the Chut HaSikra, just giving you an example. You see there's the Yesod. It's running across the whole side, and then it curves in, but doesn't continue for the whole side. What you're actually looking at is, we're not going to deal with the two holes on top of the Yesod right now. So on the northern wall of the Mizbe'ach and the western wall of the Mizbe'ach, there was a complete foundation that rose to one amma. On the eastern wall and the southern wall, there was this tiny little piece of foundation. And as we saw in the diagram, how they built this. Now, why did they build the Mizbe'ach this way, with foundation on the northern and western sides complete, and just a tiny little piece of foundation on the southern and the eastern walls of the Mizbe'ach? So I'll give you a very brief introduction. Diagram, we're going to read this tomorrow in depth. I'm just giving you the background information. Diagram 23B, it's a beautiful color picture that comes out of a special Gemara that deals with Masechta Yuma. Okay. There's the Mizbe'ach, there's the ramp, and that's going up to the Mizbe'ach. There's green and there's red. The area of the Beis HaMikdash was divided in a very unique way. This was done by Gorel, by lots, done in the days of Yoshua. And the way the lots came out was, we know Yehuda ruled Yerushalayim, but not all of Yerushalayim. Binyamin had part of Yerushalayim. And inside the Beis HaMikdash, there was a very unique split. The green area you're looking at is the area that belonged to Binyamin. The red area is the area that belonged to Shevet Yehuda. So where the Mizbe'ach was situated was split between two Shvatim. The green area belongs to Binyamin, the red area belongs to Yehuda. For reasons we will discuss tomorrow, sprinkling of blood on the Yesod, pouring blood into the Yesod HaMizbe'ach, which is what we will get to tomorrow about these two holes in diagram 21, these two holes in the Mizbe'ach, pouring blood into these holes. You're only allowed to pour blood into the Mizbe'ach if the Mizbe'ach was in the area that was owned by Binyamin. We learned that out of a pasuk. You cannot pour blood into the Mizbe'ach in the portion of the Mizbe'ach that was in the Chelek Yehuda. You're not permitted to do that. Blood had to be poured into the foundation only in that part that belonged to Binyamin. So therefore, we'll go through the exact north, south, west, east tomorrow. This green area is the part of the Mizbe'ach that's in Binyamin. And this is the western wall of the Mizbe'ach. This is the northern wall of the Mizbe'ach. It's green, it's in Binyamin. And therefore it had complete foundations because blood can be poured there. The red side belongs to Yehuda, and it didn't have a foundation because blood could not be poured there. And we'll learn tomorrow where we know what pasuk teaches us that blood can only be poured on that side of the Mizbe'ach, where on that foundation that belonged to Binyamin. But this is the background of what we're going to talk about tomorrow. Green is Binyamin. This green is the west and the north, and therefore it had a complete foundation. The east and the south of the Mizbe'ach are in the red, and they are Yehuda property, and you can't pour blood on Yehuda property. It must be in Binyamin property. Why? We'll learn about that tomorrow. We'll get a better picture of these dimensions. And that's why the Mizbe'ach was built in the diagram that we saw. They built the Mizbe'ach with the inner block so that there would be a complete yesod on the north, a complete yesod on the west, but not a complete yesod on the south or the east, because the south and the east were going to end up in Yehuda territory. The north and the west would end up in Binyamin territory. And therefore, north and west got a yesod for the blood. They were going to be in Binyamin territory. South and east were going to be in Yehuda territory. They did not get a yesod, except for a tiny little piece, which we'll discuss tomorrow, because blood would not be sprinkled there. I want you to notice, as before we finish Middos for today, you can see already in picture 1A, from the very lowest level of the Mizbe'ach, there's a pipe. The pipe continues through every level. That's the pipe that we were talking about earlier that was not in Shlomo's Mizbe'ach, with the result that with the result that the water and the wine had to flow off the side of the Mizbe'ach into the ditch and into the Shittim. In the second Beis HaMikdash, because they extended the size of the Mizbe'ach to 32, the Mizbe'ach was now on top of the ditch, but for the water and the wine to get into the ditch, they built a pipe. Okay, and that's the pipe. Now, they couldn't build this pipe by letting the stone settle and seal and harden and then digging a pipe into it, because then you would have to cut the stone. And as we're going to learn later in this perek, B'li Neder, you're not allowed to cut a stone that's on the Mizbe'ach or other place in the Beis HaMikdash. You are not allowed to lift steel on them. Lo sanif aleim barzel. Again, going back to the Yeshaya shir, Beis HaMikdash is the ultimate place where peace is to reign. And because peace is to reign, there's an Isser in the Torah at the end of Parshas Yisro. You may not lift a piece of steel in constructing the Mizbe'ach and possibly other places. The Mishnah tells us steel is something that's used to make knives, hard materials. These things are used sometimes to hurt, to kill. You cannot take steel and touch a stone of the Mizbe'ach with it, because the Mizbe'ach is there only for peaceful purposes and should not come into contact with steel. So they couldn't harden the stone and then cut a pipe, because you can't cut the pipe. What they did was, as they were pouring the stone, the lead, they took some twigs or tall branches and they stuck it into the Mizbe'ach. They poured the stone, the hot lead, the tar, and it never hardened in that area. It was blocked. And then when they finished the Mizbe'ach, they pulled out these twigs, and there was a hole there that naturally occurred. They didn't have to dig it. They didn't have to bore it. Again, that's the hole that ends up being the connection to the Shittim.